Imagine it. The year is 1913. A 6-year-old girl named Rachel runs through fields of high grass, laughing and giggling. She feels the warmth of the sun on her skin and the tug of the wind blowing her short, dark brown hair in front of her face. At this moment, and many others throughout her young life, Rachel feels a part of nature. She is connected to the trees and the flowers, the honeybees and the blue jays. Little did she know that in 1962, at the age of 55, she would speak on behalf of her natural counterparts and publish a book that would come to change our world forever. Rachel Carson was one of the major contributors to the environmental movement and a prominent figure in both the scientific and writing community. Her book, Silent Spring, would go on to alter the views of millions and help to put an end to the tyrannic ways of the chemical industry. Rachel was born May 27, 1907, in Springdale, Pennsylvania, a small town 18 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, to Robert Carson and Maria McLean. She was the youngest of 3 children, with an elder sister Marion and brother Robert Carson Jr. From a young age, Carson gravitated towards nature. She was fascinated with plants and wildlife. Her childhood was mostly spent outdoors, which instituted her love for the environment. At age 11, she published her first story in the St. Nicholas magazine. This could be pinpointed as the start to her literary career. She attended Parnassus High School in Kensington, Pennsylvania, and graduated in 1925 with honors. She was awarded a scholarship to the Pennsylvania College for Women in Pittsburgh, which is now called Chatham University. She originally intended to major in English and become a teacher. She graduated magna cum laude from the Pennsylvania College for Women in 1929, after having changed her major to biology. She won a summer scholarship to the Woods Hole Marine Biological Laboratory in Massachusetts, and later that year obtained a scholarship to Johns Hopkins University, where she graduated in 1932 with a Master of Arts degree in zoology. She was hired by the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries in 1935 and also managed a freelance writing career, publishing articles on natural history in the Baltimore Sun to bring in extra money. In 1937, her first major article, Undersea, was published in the Atlantic Monthly. Carson moved to D.C., where she worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. In July of 1944, she had her first run-in with DDT, having proposed an idea for an article to Reader's Digest, but was turned down because the content was too unpleasant to publish. Finally, in 1951, she retired from all federal duties to pursue writing full-time. A couple years later, Carson started to take notice of the pesticidal controversy. She suggested that someone write about DDT and its side effects, but soon realized that she was at the forefront of authors capable of creating such a piece and took matters into her own hands. On September 27, 1962, Silent Spring was published by Houghton Mifflin. The backlash was instantaneous. She was scrutinized by both the chemical industry and the public. She was called crazy because of her gender. She was labeled horrid names like communist, health quack, food faddist, and mystic.
Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
In April of the following year, 6 months after the publication of her book, CBS released an interview entitled The Silent Spring of Rachel Carson.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment. You can't just step in with some brute force and change one thing without changing a good many others. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we must never interfere, that we must not attempt to tilt that balance of nature in our favor. But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
2 months later in June, she was called to testify before the U.S. Senate Committee on Government Operations. She called for a limit on the amount of pesticides used industrially. Sadly, Rachel never got to see the impact her novel had on the world. She died on April 14, 1964, in Silver Spring, Maryland, at the age of 56. She'd been battling breast cancer for 7 years, having been diagnosed in 1957. To cover up her illness, she wore a dark brown wig and walked with a cane. She had known that, had the chemical industry gotten word of her ailment, they would have suggested that her cancer had clouded her judgment and her words were only that of a desperate woman on her deathbed. Only her family and closest friends knew just how sick she was. In 1970, a few years after her death, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, was founded. The concern and awareness brought on by Silent Spring was one of the main reasons the EPA was formed.
There appears to be growing concern among scientists as to the possibility of dangerous long-range side effects from the widespread use of DDT and other pesticides. Have you considered asking the Department of Agriculture or the Public Health Service to take a closer look at this?
Yes, and I know that they already are. I think particularly, of course, since Ms. Carson's book, but they are examining the matter.
An employee of the EPA released the following statement on the 50th anniversary of Silent Spring's publication. There is no question that Silent Spring prompted the federal government to take action against water and air pollution, as well as against the misuse of pesticides, several years before it otherwise might have moved. 2 years later, in 1972, the U.S. ban on DDT was finally passed. This injunction was almost entirely because of Carson's work. Silent Spring had created not only nationwide, but global consternation on the overuse of pesticides. Silent Spring is also considered the book that sparked the modern environmental movement. Carson inspired a new and more conscious international mindset. She is one of the major contributors to environmentalism. Environmentalism, defined by Merriam-Webster as advocacy of the preservation, restoration, or improvement of the natural environment, is the most popular social movement in the United States today. Over 5 million American households contribute to nonprofit environmental organizations, which raises over $350 million per year. In total, there are about 6,000 environmental groups active at present. Rachel Carson paved the way for scientists and feminists alike. She was one of the first to preach of the importance of conservation. Carson stressed the relationship between man and nature. The health of the environment was and is directly correlated to the health of humankind. She tried to convince the public that there shouldn't be a battle for dominance between humanity and Mother Earth, and that instead we could live in harmony and coexist. Her work has had a profound impact on our world and still continues to influence us politically, economically, and socially. Rachel Carson changed the way people viewed nature and prompted society to alter courses and head down a road that would provide both ourselves and the natural world with a brighter future. Carson was a pioneer of her time, and her legacy will continue to trigger positive change for the future. And one day, the idea of a silent spring, one that lacks life and vibrancy, where birds' songs are muted and the flora and fauna become torpid, will be nothing more than a horrific invention of the past.